G'day all you blokes and shearers, and welcome to Salem's Travels. Today we're going to just talk a little bit about wheel bearings on your trailer. They're all very much the same. They all have a hub. Some will have a brake assembly. So I'm going to break this into a minor and major service just so you can sort of see the difference. But every now and again I do what I call a minor service, and then just before a big trip then I'll do a major service. So to start off, we just need to take the bearing cap off. This is the cap, and usually you have to take the wheel off to get the correct angle so you can sort of tap it off, but this one sticks out a bit. So the first thing to check is that there's grease inside your cap, which there is. Sometimes whoever was at your wheel bearing last, if they didn't put enough grease in there, that cap will be dry. As the wheel spins, it throws all the grease out and away from the cap. And if there's nothing in there, you know there wasn't enough grease put in it, which is never a good thing. So if that was dry, the first step would obviously to put grease in there, but it's got a bit in there. Keep in mind that the nut sticks out into the cap area, so you've got to make allowance for there. If you put too much grease in there, you'll have trouble putting the cap on. You won't damage anything, you can't put too much in, but if you can't get the cap back on, then just pull it back off and pull some of the grease out and give it another go. Now, holding your hub on is a nut and a split pin. So we just simply straighten up the split pin leg so we can pull it through the hole that's in the shaft. They don't always come out that easy, but now the other thing to check when you look at the grease that's here and the grease that's here on your hub is just to make sure there's no water in it. If there's water in it, then you have to do a major service essentially, because water and bearings are not the best of mates and they do not get along together well. Now the next step is really to make sure there's no play in the wheel. So you can either shake the wheel backwards and forwards, and you can do this with it on the ground if it's not a heavy trailer. And when you shake it, you'll be able to feel if there's any movement. A little bit's no problem, but if there's a lot, then that's an issue. If you've got a big caravan, then you'll probably need to jack up the trailer so that you can spin the wheel and just give it a bit of a shake. Now what I'll do is I'll loosen off the nut so you can sort of see an exaggerated loose bearing. Alright, so you can see the movement, you can hear it. Tighten it up a bit. That clicking noise is indicative of a loose bearing. Again, it's not the end of the world if it's a little loose, and as the bearing wears out, it will cause a bit of play. So if we were doing a minor service, all we would do is tighten this up, and I usually go until the nut stops easily, and then just go a little bit extra. So you really only need to go tight enough to take the play out of it. And that's pretty much it. You just put a new split pin back in, stick the cap back on, and you're done. Now if for some reason you're doing a major service, whether you want to just make sure everything's right, or perhaps you found some water or mud inside your bearing and you want to pull it apart, give it a better look, then you need to take the wheel off. So you take the wheel off, put that over there. So this is the hub. If you had brakes, then the brake mechanism would be around here, but we don't have brakes on this little guy, so there's just the hub. And we'll just take this nut off. So I can show you what's going on. So you'll see this nut has little cutouts in it, so it looks a bit like a castle from the olden days, which is how the nut gets its name. And obviously the idea of those cutouts is so the split pin can go through and stop the nut from undoing. So even if you don't do up your nut tight enough, it can't undo itself, so there's no risk of your nut becoming undone and the wheel falling off. Now behind the nut there'll be a washer, and every trailer I've ever seen has a washer. Just a plain flat washer. And then we've got a wheel bearing. As you can see, there's plenty of grease impregnated in it, which is great. Now to check it, I just really rotate it, and you sort of got to use a bit of feel to see if it rotates cleanly, or if there's a point where it suddenly stops, or it goes tight and then loose as it turns. Bearings are super cheap, so there's no point putting an old one in. Just put a new one in, then keep the old one for a spare if you're on a big trip. Now one tip I'll give you is to lay down a bit of cardboard or a rag on the ground. Because these are covered in grease, they will pick up every speck of dirt or blade of grass that comes their way, and it's kind of pointless going to all the effort of making the bearing good and healthy if you're gonna add a bit of dirt into the system. Now the hub just pulls off. Sometimes they're a bit tight, but in this case it's not. So on the back here we have a seal, and in here we've got another bearing. If I clean this up a bit, you'll be able to see the bearing. The shiny bit is the outer of the bearing, so that's the outer bearing, and there's another inner bearing. And if you feel inside, you'll feel a lip where the bearing's pressed up against, and you just get a chisel on that edge and chisel the bearing out. So obviously you would stick the chisel in through the back, and you want to just grab the bearing itself. You don't want to hit the lip of the hub, just the bearing. And you just hammer it out. You do a couple of taps on each side until it comes out. And it's the same for this bearing. Usually I do the bearing and the seal at the same time. I just put a chisel through, a flat chisel, and you just want to get the lip. So I'm pretty happy with that as it is. There's no need to do anything with that. If the bearings were in bad shape, I'd replace them, but they seem pretty good. If you do a lot of water crossings or a lot of work in really fine dust, then it's probably worth just changing at least the seals. If we were going to add grease, it's just a matter of sticking it in the middle there. You can see it's all full of grease. So just But there's plenty of grease in there, plenty of grease there. So we'll just stick it all back together. Stick the bearing on. Stick the washer on. Now just take note of where the hole is for the split pin before you put the nut back on. And we just screw the nut on. Now there are, if you want to be technical, there are certain amounts of torque that you should tighten this nut to, and then probably untighten a certain amount. But if you tighten the nut to a certain point, because obviously where it is now is about where the split pin has to go. Now the next available spot for the split pin is around here, which is quite a significant amount of, if I go all that way, and you can see that's a real effort to turn. Okay, you can feel the bearings under a lot of pressure as it rotates. You can feel it's almost like driving on corrugations. So obviously that's too tight, and that's not going to do anybody any good. So I'll just back it off to the next available spot, and you can see it's a lot freer. It's rotating, it feels a lot smoother. So we'll just stick our split pin in. Just give it a little tap. And just bend the legs up. Folding up like that. Now normally I'd shove a bit more grease in the cap there, but she looks pretty good, so we'll just put it back together. And that's pretty much it. That's all that's involved in checking your bearings. The golden rule for anything mechanical is, if you're unsure, check it. More things fail because they've been left unchecked than people that do it wrong. As I showed you, it's easy to check the wheel. All you have to do is give it a bit of a shake, or jack it up and give it a shake, and if you feel that there's movement in it, then just pull it apart and tighten it up again. So that's it. That's all there is to checking a wheel bearing. Stick the wheel back on and we're good to move to the next side. As always, if you found this video helpful in any way, then please give us a like, and if you want to see more tips and tools for camping and the outdoors, then hit that subscribe button. Hooroo!